Just so you know, this program is going to be recorded. Welcome, everyone, to Visions for the Future. It's really wonderful to have you all here and to see so many of you here and to see so many faces and names online, even if I'd much prefer a warm and cozy potluck at the Jack in a live program, but that will come soon enough, I hope, and we'll be ready. I'm Elaine Schroeder, and I'm the co-chair of 350 Juneau. Our climate group works and organizes on the occupied land of the Okwan and Takuquan of the Tlingit people. We honor their relationship to the land since time immemorial, Gunashish to the original people. And while we're waiting for more folks to come online, let's savor the wonderful election result. With Joe Biden and Kamala Harris soon to be in the White House, we now have the possibility of America rising to meet our climate emergency. It was touch and go, I believe, for the planet, and now I can almost hear it breathe a sigh of relief. Almost. We got a few more weeks to go. But as we know, there's a huge amount of work to be done to keep our world livable and equally important, equitable. And now we can have a president and a vice president in office who we can pressure to do even more for climate change. 350 Juneau supports a just transition where frontline communities, especially those hit hardest by this fossil fuel crisis, are fairly treated. We support building economic and political power to shift from an extractive economy to a regenerative economy. And you'll hear much more about this soon. Let me give you some information about tonight. We'll all be hearing from 350 Juneau board members, a couple of them, about past and future campaigns and events. Zach Brown, a local climate scientist who is now on the Indian Islands, will take a look at what we need to do, including strategies that would radically reduce the power and production of the oil industry giants who are wrecking our planet. After our speakers, we'll watch a short video narrated by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez about a wonderful and doable vision for a just and green future. We'll want to hear from you on chat, especially during Zach's talk and after the film. Here's how to find chat if you already don't know. You go to the bottom of your screen, and you may have to roll your cursor there to see it. Okay, sometimes it's hidden until you roll your cursor. When you're done writing in chat, which will be at the very bottom of this list, you just press enter, and your comments will be visible to everyone. And we'll be recording this meeting, as I said, so that people can watch it later. And Jane Ginter is our tech volunteer, and you can contact her in chat if at any time during this program you're having any trouble or any problems with the Zoom tonight. And when you press 2, you'll see a list of names. Just click on Jane's name and it'll go directly to her, and only she will see it. So now that we have everybody on board, this would be a great time to take a moment for each of you in chat, if you are feeling okay about doing that. For each of you, just a second here. Hold on. I have a little technical glitch here. And anyways, we'd like you to take a moment to write 2 things in chat. And you don't need to give us your name since it'll automatically show up. And if you have already identified yourself, that is on your little thumbnail photo, it'll show up like that. So first, in a word or 2, and it's on the screen right now, describe how you're feeling at this moment. What mood are you in a word or 2 or 3? And then on the next line, write 1 reason why you came here tonight. We'll put the questions, they're on the screen to remind you. So I'm going to give you a moment right now to think about it and write your responses in chat, and then we can all see them. Okay. Ha, ha, ha. Looks like some people are pretty excited, feeling great. Wow, generally positive. Okay. Got the heat pump blowing. Cautiously optimistic. 2 people are cautiously optimistic. Feeling good. Hopeful. Weary. Weary. No wonder. Okay. Or wary. Maybe that's wary. Oh, fiery. Zach is fiery. Good. I'm glad to hear John Siska's optimistic. That makes me feel good. Ready to go, says Teresa. Okay, Yvette, some people are not very optimistic. Grateful. It's great to see friendly faces, I agree. Okay, wondering what's coming next. Looking forward to positive changes. Noam Chomsky, urge to action. He's one of my favorite guys. He's my hero. That's great. Okay, we seem, and if any more come in, please feel free to do so. And we can then move on, because I'd like now to introduce Doug Woodsby, my co-chair at 350 Juneau. And Doug will review some of the activities that our group, 350, has accomplished over the past year or so. Go for it, Doug.
All right, thanks, Elaine. Can you all hear me okay?
Yeah, you may want to take the screen share off.
Well, I'm going to use the screen share. So
okay.
While you guys are working on that chat question, I'm going to share this graph that you may be familiar with. I'm sharing it because it shows the factual basis for our climate crisis and why we need a vision for our future. The red line that you see here, right there, shows that ever since the Industrial Revolution, the world has burned so much coal, oil, and gas that the amount of carbon dioxide in our air is well above the safe level of 350 parts per million. That's the level that scientists believe is the upper limit for sustaining life as we know it. And it's also where our group gets its name. So I think the message is clear. We need to bend this curve and stop emitting so much into the air. The scientific consensus is also quite clear that the majority of all our known fossil fuel reserves must stay in the ground if we're ever going to avoid the worst climate impacts. And that means no more exploration or development. So how are we going to do that? Well, in short, in terms of energy, we need to develop renewable energy sources to replace fossil fuels, and we need to electrify everything. Now, at this point, I'm going to give a shout out to 2 Alaskan groups who are promoting renewable energy. One is the Renewable Energy Alaska Project, or REAP, based in Anchorage and going strong for 16 years. The good folks there work statewide in so many different ways to promote renewables and energy efficiency. And the second one I want to give a shout out to is Renewable Juneau. It's one of our sister organizations, and they've developed a robust vision for Juneau to become a model city powered by renewable energy for virtually all energy uses, and that includes transportation and heating. And we'll put their web address in the chat in a moment. And I would recommend visiting their websites to see all the great work that they do. And their efforts are really important and very necessary, but there is a very big problem. Even with potential policy changes with the new Biden administration, the fossil fuel companies have plans to accelerate exploration and development. And it's a problem because the industry has a stranglehold on our political So with that, let's look at some of what 350 Juneau has done in the past year to address this problem. First off, we've joined a great coalition called Stop the Money Pipeline, and it's an effective and active group that pressures major financial players to stop supporting the fossil fuel industry. And they do this through the major banks that are funding the operations, insurance companies that provide the insurance, asset managers that hold so much of the monetary assets, and pension funds and endowments. 350 Juneau has been working largely in this fourth category. We've been actively encouraging the Alaska Permanent Fund Corporation and the state's pension funds to divest their fossil fuel assets. Okay, so what else have we been doing? Perhaps you've come to some of our community events. About a year ago in September, we hosted Dan Grossman. He's an international climate journalist, and he gave a well-attended lecture at the Jack on climate impacts on frontline communities. His talk was concurrent, and not coincidentally, with a meeting of the International Forum of Sovereign Wealth Funds. They were hosted here in Juneau by the Permanent Fund Corporation, which manages our nation's only sovereign wealth fund. And the very next day, we had a divestment rally at the Capitol under very sunny September skies. And we followed that with a march to Centennial Hall, where the International Forum was meeting. And we had over 30 high school students carrying signs of flags from each of the member nations of the forum. And then beginning with the legislative session in January, weekly climate emergency rallies at the Capitol and had a variety of speakers. And we did that until the pandemic hit in March. And since then, we've had just one gathering, and that was our Get Extra Tough on Climate boot strike, and that was at the Capitol in August. And it was a demonstration that we could express our concerns about the climate crisis and do it in a COVID-safe manner. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all of you who brought your boots and shoes to speak for you at that event. And that's the sum of it. And I'm going to pass it now back to Elaine.
Thank you. Thanks, Doug. I'm now really excited to introduce our guest speaker who knows climate change from the inside out. We are so pleased to have Zach Brown join us tonight from the Hobbit Hole, located south of Glacier Bay in the remote Indian Islands. Zach grew up in Gustavus and holds a PhD in climate science from Stanford University. He's the founder of the Indian Islands Institute, an ecological field school that hosts field courses for university students and other folks interested in the interface between wilderness ecology and climate. Zach is also a dedicated climate activist. In fact, he gave a rousing speech at our divestment climate rally a year ago. You saw a picture of that a year ago, September. And after Zach's talk, we'll have a Q&A, questions and answers. So what you can do is during his talk, so you don't have to remember if you have a question that Zach can answer, just to write it in the chat. So put your questions or comments in the chat, and then Jim Samard will moderate after that, and Zach will respond to your questions. So now let's hear from Zach.
Thank you, Elaine. Hey, everybody. I am blown away to see over 50 people here. My goodness. Go Juneau. Climate power. It's time. I hope you all are happy and healthy. Thanks to Elaine and Doug and 350 Juneau for inviting me to speak. I'd like to begin by acknowledging with honor and respect that I am speaking to you on the Tlingit Ani, on the traditional lands of the Huna Kawu. I'd also like to begin by sending a prayer out to the people of Honduras who are enduring their second massive hurricane in 2 weeks. Hundreds of thousands have become climate refugees. Their suffering, I would say, reminds us first of the terrible injustice of the climate crisis. Wherever you look, the less you did to cause the problem, the greater you suffer from it. And second, that the climate crisis is here now. It's getting worse with every day of inaction. So thank you for being here. We need you. I'm honored to be here. I've got myself a beer poured. I hope you've got one too. So let's do this. I'm gonna stop my video because I have a very limited bandwidth out here at the Indian.
We can't hear you, Zach.
I muted myself instead of turning my video off. Whoops, there we go. It goes. See that okay?
Yeah.
So, this is where we're going tonight. Why aren't we changing? This is the great question of our time. Doug alluded to it. There's a lot of wrong answers out there, so I'd like to clear this up tonight. Why are we stuck in inaction? Well, for starters, it's not because we don't know enough. We know plenty. The solutions are here. What I'm showing you is the price of a solar panel in orange and global solar installations in blue. So you can see the exponential decline in price and the exponential increase in solar capacity. Now, a couple years ago, Bill Gates decided to throw some of his vast fortune at climate change. And so he came out and said, we need an energy miracle to fix the climate crisis. People from the climate movement who've actually been paying attention slapped their foreheads and said, no, we don't need an energy miracle. That makes it sound like at the moment we have no choice but fossil fuels, which is complete BS. So Michael Liebrich, a global renewable energy expert, responded, are you kidding? The price of solar power has come down 150-fold and deployment has gone up by 115,000-fold. How much more miracle-y do you need your miracles to be? This is our miracle. It has arrived. Solar now delivers the cheapest energy ever, anywhere, from any technology in history. And I could show you comparable miracle graphs for wind power, for battery storage, for electric vehicles, for smart grids. The renewable energy revolution is going so fast, it's demolished the predictions of the world's energy experts. And so Mark Jacobson from Stanford University has published comprehensive roadmaps for every nation on earth and every state of the union to convert entirely to wind, water, and solar with existing technology. These plans would create jobs, they would save millions of lives, mainly by reducing air pollution, and of course, save us from the worst ravages of climate warming. Really hard to see what's not to like about all this. So again, the question is, why aren't we changing? Why aren't we pursuing these beautiful paths towards the future? Well, in 2012, Bill McKibben, one of our greatest climate warriors and founder of 350.org, he published a sobering article in Rolling Stone, which I consider the most important climate change article ever written. This was the cover photo of that issue of Rolling Stone, Justin Bieber, hot, ready, legal. But you never know. If you look in the top right is an article called Global Warming's Terrifying New Math. This is where McKibben demonstrated this hard mathematical truth that in order to preserve a livable world, 80% of proven fossil fuel reserves have to be left in the ground. Now that's the coal, oil, and gas that we know is there beneath our feet, and 80% of it has to stay there or we cook the planet. Just one problem. That 80% of proven fossil fuel reserves represents some $20 trillion in profits for the fossil fuel industry. So now we can begin to see the true nature of the climate crisis. You want to try telling ExxonMobil or Royal Dutch Shell they have to leave $20 trillion in the ground? You think they're going to like that very much? Not so much. They're going to fight tooth and nail to ensure that we burn all this carbon, 100%, so that they can keep raking in their profits. Won't surprise any of you on the call tonight to learn that there are very close ties between the fossil fuel industry and our government. There's an exchange going on here. There's an arrow going this way. What does industry do for government? Well, the big one is campaign finance. You know, buying politicians by giving them the money to get elected. There is a tidal wave of dirty money sloshing through our government. The Koch brothers alone pumped nearly $1 billion into the 2016 presidential election. Let's just say they got what they wanted. How about lobbying? The fossil fuel industry is lobbying our federal government at a tune of about $1 million per day. That's just pushing for policies that benefit them. There's an arrow the other way. What does government do for the fossil fuel industry? Well, subsidies and tax breaks. The fossil fuel industry globally is subsidized to the tune of about some $2 trillion a year. That makes fossil fuels artificially profitable for fossil fuel companies and artificially cheap for consumers, so that there's less incentive to switch. How about policy? Policies like being able to drill on federal lands, reduction of oversight and regulation, policies making it harder to add rooftop solar, and on and on. And increasingly right now, we see political appointments, people from the fossil fuel industry walking straight into government, from Scott Pruitt to Rex Tillerson, where they get to make the rules that they once had to follow. Round and around we go. And out of this nefarious circle is spawned climate change denial. See, climate change denial doesn't just happen organically. This is not some grassroots movement. Climate change denial is manufactured by the industry that stands to gain. It's extremely profitable for the fossil fuel industry to have the nation divided on whether the climate crisis even exists. So they work very hard and spend a lot of money to foster climate denial. Over the last few years, we've seen more and more revelations about Exxon misleading the public and its investors. They're using the exact same playbook as Big Tobacco a generation before, attacking climate scientists, publishing books, films, advertisements, websites, all saying climate change is a hoax. And of course, putting their favorite climate denying politicians in office. And so you get headlines like this one from The Economist. Fossil fuel barons have poured more than $100 million into Republican campaigns, raising concerns about special interests. That's the understatement of the 21st century. Special interests run our government. I remember seeing Al Gore speak back at Stanford, and I'll never forget his words. He said, "We can't solve the climate crisis until we solve the democracy crisis." And we have one. We do not live in a democracy in this country. We live in an oligarchy where the wealthiest industries control our government. This is called corruption. What's the result of all this corruption? Well, it's government policy that favors fossil fuel interests, from rolling back auto emission standards to opening almost all federal waters to drilling, on and on, most notoriously withdrawing us from the Paris Climate Accord. The nation that has historically pumped the most carbon into the atmosphere is also the only nation currently not committed to a global pact to reduce carbon emissions. I don't know about you, but this really pisses me off. All told, the Trump administration has reversed over 100 environmental rules and regulations, with a particularly savage approach to anything regarding climate or carbon regulations. Here's the bottom line, is that the fossil fuel industry is the enemy in the climate change fight. Their business model is based on burning 5 times as much carbon as the atmosphere can safely absorb, and they know it. And I hope I've convinced you that they have no intention of changing that business model. They will watch the world burn before they give up their profits. That's the true nature of the climate crisis. Therefore, the only solution is to take them out of power. It's time for us to turn the blame frame around. The fossil fuel industry wants us to believe that because we all use fossil fuels, that it's our fault, and that the only way to solve things is to change ourselves. Because as long as we're stuck on changing our light bulbs without changing the system, they can keep right on drilling. And I'm not just speculating that that's what the fossil fuel industry wants us to believe. They've spent millions to convince us to blame ourselves. Did you know that the whole concept of the carbon footprint is a fossil fuel industry invention conjured up by British Petroleum in 2005 in a $100 million ad campaign? Here's what that campaign looked like. Look how they shift the blame, talking about your mark on the world, CO2 emitted due to your daily activities. And meanwhile, they're calling themselves Beyond Petroleum, absurdly, even as they continue to lobby the government and fight tooth and nail against any policies to reduce the systemic addiction to fossil fuels. Look how they end this. It's a start. And they know, of course, that it's only a start, that if we buy into this personal responsibility thing, it will make us totally ineffective at solving this crisis. And boy, have we bought into it. This is where it's at. I don't care if you recycle. Mary Haglar is a badass young woman of color, one of our best environmental writers, and she's right. We've been talking about recycling and other personal actions for 3 decades. And in that time, carbon emissions have skyrocketed, growing by over 40%. It's time to realize that it doesn't work. We have to change the system, pull it up by the very roots of injustice, inequality, and unchecked corporate power. This is the takeaway, okay, from the master himself, Bill McKibben, founder of 350.org. It's the most common question he receives as one of our most dedicated climate activists on the planet. He gives a simple answer: become less of an individual. Join the movement for climate justice. What does that look like? Well, now we know the true nature of the climate crisis, and this knowledge is empowering because now we understand what we have to do. We have to break these arrows. Simple. Not easy, that's for sure. Not easy, but simple. Our task is to take the fossil fuel industry out of power. So what are the tools of the climate movement? Divestment. Divestment means organizations are pulling their investments and endowments out of the fossil fuel industry and reinvesting them elsewhere. To date, over 1,000 organizations, religious organizations, cities and towns, nonprofits, even entire nations, and especially colleges and universities worth over $14 trillion have pulled out of fossil fuels. And as renewables get cheaper and more popular, and as the pandemic crushes oil demand, fossil fuel stocks are tanking. Check this out. ExxonMobil dropped out of the Dow Jones after nearly a century. Divestment makes business sense as well as moral sense. It's time for Alaska to divest its permanent fund and its pension fund. First off, stop investing in climate destruction. And second of all, stop making bad bets that are losing dollars for Alaskans. Now, closely allied, as we've seen, is stop the money pipeline. You know, finance is the newest front of the climate wars. As McKibben puts it, money is the oxygen that fuels the climate crisis. Stop the money pipeline. I'm so glad 350Juneau is part of this coalition. They've particularly targeted Chase Bank, which has lent fossil fuels nearly $200 billion since the Paris Climate Accord was signed, an agreement they pretend to support. They are financing climate destruction. That has to stop. And of course, we have to get political to solve the climate crisis. You know, that can make some folks uncomfortable, but I'm not going to sit here and watch one political party block climate action for 3 decades and then pretend it's not a political problem. And I won't tell you that the world is on fire and then tell you the best we can do is change our light bulbs. The tools that will turn this around are political tools. The election wasn't quite the massive climate victory we hoped for, but thank goodness Trump was defeated, our most destructive environmental president ever by far. And now all eyes turn to Georgia, where 2 Senate runoffs will determine Senate control on January 5. Biden has the strongest climate platform of any presidential nominee in history. But all that ambition will go nowhere as long as Mitch McConnell is Senate Majority Leader. He can and will block all meaningful climate legislation. So I urge you to donate to the Warnock and Ossoff campaigns and to Stacey Abrams' organization Fair Fight. There's a bunch of others throwing down on these Georgia races. I'll be writing letters through Vote Forward. I can show you how. It truly is now or never for the climate crisis. And I know I've gone over my 10 or 12 minutes. This is just the very last thing. If we win, that will put us on a path towards the Green New Deal, which you're going to hear about from AOC in just a few minutes. What is the Green New Deal? It's not a detailed set of policy proposals. It's not legislation. It is a vision. It's a framework for a just transition away from fossil fuels on the dramatically rapid timeline we need. It doesn't try to address climate change in a vacuum. The Green New Deal recognizes that you can't solve climate change without addressing the systemic racism that allows the fossil fuel industry to disproportionately harm communities of color. The Green New Deal recognizes you can't solve climate crisis without a strong labor movement with high-paying union jobs, dignified work to rebuild a cleaner society. This is where Biden's motto comes from: build back better. Fossil fuels are woven into the very fabric of our society. a societal fabric that also has horrible levels of inequality, poverty, mass incarceration, and systemic racism. It's a fantasy to think that we can solve these one at a time. The fabric of our society needs to be rewoven. That's what the Green New Deal proposes to do. The Green New Deal is the goal of the Sunrise Movement, the political organizing wing of the youth climate movement. Can you see in their eyes their pleas for a livable future? So I highly recommend this book, Winning the Green New Deal. This book connects the dots and paints a beautiful picture of what our climate future could be. I'll let AOC tell you the rest. Thank you very much. If there's any times left, I'll take a couple of questions.
Absolutely. Thank you very, very much. I had mentioned Jim Simard before. Let me introduce Jim. He's a 350Juneau board member, and he will moderate the question and answer time with Zach. And I'll watch the clock, so just keep going until I say it's time to stop.
Thank you very much, Zach. Teresa asks, but realistically, how can we support economic growth in Alaska right now while also divesting in drilling oil? What is our strongest argument?
Thank you very much, Teresa. Well, to me, the strongest argument for that is we all know that Alaska basically has all of its economic eggs in the oil basket. I think Republicans and Democrats would acknowledge that. And if you're talking with somebody who's saying we can't change, oil is our economy, why don't you just ask them, how's our economy doing right now? How's that working out for you? How's that working out for Alaskans? I'd say that that's a pretty brutal indictment of where the fossil fuel economy is leading us. And so the diversification of our economy, I think is huge. Alaska has huge renewable energy resources. Jobs are created when we invest in the future. And by continuing to invest in the economy of the past, we as Alaskans will be left behind by that future and continue to wallow in this economic recession that's been with us since 2014, when the price of oil tanked the first time. Now it's tanked again. So that's what I'd say.
All right. Yvette asks about tourism and retraining. What do you think about these?
Yeah, I think tourism. Gosh, tourism is a sticky one, of course, because all of our travel in the current world is fossil fuel based. But I think tourism is definitely a big part of the mix for Alaska's economy. I know in Southeast, it's a big part of the reason that we're able to continue to protect the Tongass National Forest, which is not just a world treasure, but also a massive store of carbon. Was there also a piece there about retraining?
Retraining.
I think that, and this is something that's written into the vision for the Green New Deal, is that no one can be, to have a truly just transition, no one can be left behind. That means audacious retraining programs for people in the fossil fuel sector, which remains a significant part of the American economy, so that those workers are ending up in dignified, high-paying, unionized jobs with benefits, building the energy systems of the future. So retraining is an absolutely crucial part of any just transition, whether you're talking on the national level, the global, or right here in the state.
Okay. Here's an interesting question from John. Will trying to kill the fossil fuel industry get us to where we want to be faster than trying to enlist their help? With the country divided, it's going to take some time to change the political makeup. What are your thoughts?
That's an awful good question, and I wish that I didn't have such a clear answer. In a way, it's really too bad that the fossil fuel industry has shown us their true colors again and again and again. You know, a lot of people ask why wouldn't they become the great renewable energy companies of the future, and the answer is that fossil fuels are their business, and they've decided that it's much cheaper and a better decision for their profits to fight change rather than enact change. And that's what they've been doing without exception ever since the 1970s, when their very own scientists were the ones who knew were at the vanguard of climate science, and they buried it from the rest of us, and they're continuing to do the exact same thing. I regret to report that the fossil fuel industry cannot be enlisted as a partner in this transition. Every time that they've gotten a seat at climate talks, they do their best to torpedo them. Every time. There are no exceptions that I'm aware of. So we have to do the work of building a better future despite them, not with them.
One last thing, Zach. In working with Senator Murkowski, do you have any suggestion about what our strongest arguments are?
I so wish that that Senator Murkowski would come around on climate and renewable energy. She's done a few tepid things, as I understand it, and I'm not an expert on this. I should. I think there's a lot of people on this call who know Alaska politics and Murkowski's record better than I do. You know, of course, she's not a hardcore climate change denier like her fellow Senator Sullivan, but she has not risen to the challenge of climate. That's putting it generously or mildly. I think her notion of a climate future is one where we extract more and more fossil fuels so that we can pay for the ravages of climate chaos. And that to me is a little bit backwards. To my understanding, she has pushed fossil fuel extraction here in Alaska and nationally with every chance that she's had, including ANWR, which has been her baby for an awful long time, and which the Trump administration is trying to get those leases out on the very last day of their administration, which is just absurd. So what is our best argument with Senator Murkowski? If she's reachable, I think it will be through the demands of a great movement of Alaskans, and that must include the voices and highlight the voices of Alaska Natives who are on the front lines of the climate crisis. I think that Murkowski has shown that she will bend to public pressure if enough of it is put on her, and that's and she is up for re-election in 2022. Can we get her to work with a Biden administration to advance some climate initiatives? Probably not the full-scale Green New Deal, but I think she can be put under a lot of pressure with her re-election coming up.
Thank you. We'll turn it back over to Elaine.
Thank you. It was so interesting. We went over, and I didn't want to stop. And there's fascinating questions out there, which I wish we had time to answer. But we promised you a 1-hour program, and we want to stick to that. So thank you so much, Zach, for the answers, and Jim for moderating. And now I'd like to introduce board member Bob Schroeder. Though Bob's an anthropologist by training, his quantitative skills have been very useful to 350 Juneau's bottom line, as he's been treasurer-in-chief for the past almost 3 years since our group began. So let's hear from Bob.
Thanks a lot, Elaine. Am I coming through okay?
Great.
Hey, we're in the midst of a pandemic and just starting to recover from 4 years of political chaos with our country still being led by climate deniers. Woo. But we've got a huge amount of work to do, even to begin to reduce global heating and to mitigate the effects of the climate catastrophe. This work can't wait. I'll be outlining 350 Juneau's commitment to a just transition and want to let you know of 350 Juneau's divestment campaign. Those are my two topics. As you're well aware, Americans and the world population is in for a world of hurt from global warming, forest fires, droughts, floods, hurricanes, weird weather, disruption of food supplies, Anthropocene extinctions, you name it. Disproportionately, as Zach mentioned, the worst effects of the climate catastrophe are being borne by the poor and dispossessed, those whose lives have contributed least to the runaway climate changes we face. Moving off the dime and reducing carbon emissions immediately and moving to a carbon neutral economy is not a choice, but an inevitability. Just transition for 350 Juneau means that as America and the world society will certainly move to a very different future, that the pain and the costs of this change are shared. To succeed at addressing the climate catastrophe and literally make a new society, we need to address the fundamental underlying problems that characterize our society. Without addressing systemic racism and white privilege, we won't succeed. Without recognizing Indigenous rights and reversing the colonial settler relationship, we will not succeed. Without reversing extreme wealth concentration and creating a more equitable society, we will not succeed. Without creating a true democracy, we will not succeed. Without recognizing our shared responsibility to protect the environment and reverse the sweep of extinctions, we will not succeed. A just transition means creating a new society. Now, just transition is an overarching goal, but what are some of the things we can do at the grassroots level in our state and community? 350 Juneau works on many things, and you'll hear about more of them later on. But our main continuing campaign is to push as hard as we can to get the Alaska Permanent Fund and the Alaska Retirement Management Board to divest from all fossil fuel holdings. Alaska's addiction to oil and gas production and the control of the fossil fuel interests have on our political process is no secret. But you may not have known that this addiction and loyalty to fossil capitalism continues to influence how our funds are invested. The fund and the board manage about $90 billion of our money. Both groups have steadfastly refused to examine how continued fossil fuel investments have lost lots of money for Alaskans and how precarious these investments are becoming in a world that inevitably is moving from the use of fossil fuels. Incredibly, the fund and the board are unwilling to perform a risk assessment so that they even know how global heating will affect our $90 billion of investments. 350 Juneau's been there for you. We've testified at all fund and board meetings over the past 3 years. We've filed public record requests to uncover fund and board investment holdings and any discussions that board members may have had concerning climate risk. We bring in speakers and demonstrated at the landmark International Association of Sovereign Wealth Funds meeting last year, as was mentioned. This fight will go on, and as Zach said, it's not going to be easy. We need your help to up the pressure to get both funds to take their heads out of the sand. It won't be an easy win. The managing boards are made up of a mix of state of Alaska commissioners and members appointed by the governor. Not exactly our team, guys. We're not alone in this fight. Internationally, over 1,246 organizations have divested $14.1 trillion from the fossil fuel industry. We work closely, as was mentioned earlier, with 350.org nationally, with Stop the Money Pipeline, and with Climate Safe Pension Fund, and the Alaska Statewide Climate Coalition, and other organizations. We need you to come join with us. The next Permanent Fund meeting is December 9th to 10th. The next Retirement Management Board meeting is December 2nd. Your actions will make a difference. Contact us and we'll give you the contact information in the chat to find out how you can be more involved and to help yourself make Alaska a better place. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Bob. Um, and let me repeat what Bill McKibben said and was quoted by Zach. Money is the oxygen on which the fire of global warming burns. So now it's time to stop the money pipeline to the fossil fuel industry and cut off the oxygen that continues to burn up our planet. So we're now going to show a wonderfully inspiring short film called Message from the Future, narrated by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. So Jane, roll them.
Ah, the bullet train from New York to DC. It always brings me back to when I first started making this commute. In 2019, I was a freshman in the most diverse Congress in history. Up to that point, it was a critical time. I'll never forget the children in our community. They were so inspired to see this new class of politicians who reflected them, navigating the halls of power. It's often said, you can't be what you can't see. And for the first time, they saw themselves. I think there was something similar with the Green New Deal. We knew that we needed to save the planet and that we had all the technology to do it, but people were scared. They said it was too big, too fast, not practical. I think that's because they just couldn't picture it yet. Anyways, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's start with how we got here. 1977, New York. A senior scientist named James Black made a presentation about how burning fossil fuels could eventually lead to global temperatures rising 4 or 5 degrees Fahrenheit. Within 2 years, one of the world's biggest supertankers was outfitted with a state-of-the-art lab to measure CO2 in the ocean, gathering more data about global warming. Guess who was doing all of this research? ExxonMobil, the oil and gas company. Oh yeah, Exxon knew this whole time, as did our politicians. 10 years later, James Hansen, NASA's top climate scientist, told Congress he was 99% certain that global warming was happening and caused by humans. That was 1988, the year before I was even born. So did Exxon listen to the science, including their own? Did they change business models, invest in renewables? No, the opposite. They knew and they doubled down. They and others spent millions setting up a network of lobby groups and think tanks to create doubt and denial about climate change. It was an effort designed to attack and dispute the very kind of science they themselves had been doing. And it worked. Politicians went to bat for fossil fuels, and these massive corporations kept digging and mining, drilling and fracking like there was no tomorrow. America became the biggest producer and consumer of oil in the world. Fossil fuel companies made hundreds of billions, while the public paid the lion's share to clean up their disasters. We lost a generation of time we'll never get back. Entire species will never get back. Natural wonders gone forever. And in 2017, Hurricane Maria destroyed the place where my family was from, Puerto Rico. It was like a climate bomb. It took as many American lives as 9/11. And in the next year, when I was elected to Congress, the world's leading climate scientists declared another emergency. They told us that we had 12 years left to cut our emissions in half, or hundreds of millions of people would be more likely to face food and water shortages, poverty, and death. 12 years to change everything. How we got around, how we fed ourselves, how we made our stuff, how we lived and worked, everything. The only way to do it was to transform our economy, which we already knew was broken, since the vast majority of wealth was going to just a small handful of people, and most folks were falling further and further behind. It was a true turning point. Lots of people gave up. They said we were doomed. But some of us remembered that as a nation, we'd been in peril before. The Great Depression, World War II. We knew from our history how to pull together to overcome impossible odds. And at the very least, we owed it to our children to try. The wave began when Democrats took back the House in 2018, and then the Senate and the White House in 2020, and launched the decade of the Green New Deal, a flurry of legislation that kicked off our social and ecological transformation to save the planet. It was the kind of swing for the fence ambition we needed. Finally, we were entertaining solutions on the scale of the crises we faced without leaving anyone behind. That included Medicare for All, the most popular social program in American history. We also introduced the federal jobs guarantee, a public option including dignified living wages for work. Funnily enough, the biggest problem in those early years was a labor shortage. We were building a national smart grid, retrofitting every building in America, putting trains like this one all across the country. We needed more workers. That group of kids from my neighborhood were right in the middle of it all, especially this one girl, Ileana. Her first job out of college was with AmeriCorps Climate, restoring wetlands and bayous in coastal Louisiana. Most of her friends were in her union, including some oil workers in transition. They took apart old pipelines and got to work planting mangroves with the same salary and benefits. Of course, when it came to healing the land, we had huge gaps in our knowledge. Luckily, Indigenous communities offered generational expertise to help guide the way. Ileana got restless, tried her hand as a solar plant engineer for a while, but eventually made her career in raising the next generation as part of the Universal Child Care Initiative. As it turns out, caring for others is valuable, low-carbon work, and we started paying real money to folks like teachers, domestic workers, and home health aides. Those were years of massive change, and not all of it was good. When Hurricane Sheldon hit southern Florida, parts of Miami went underwater for the last time. But as we battled the floods, fires, and droughts, we knew how lucky we were to have started acting when we did. And we didn't just change the infrastructure, we changed how we did things. We became a society that was not only modern and wealthy, but dignified and humane too. By committing to universal rights like healthcare and meaningful work for all, we stopped being so scared of the future. We stopped being scared of each other, and we found our shared purpose. Ileana heard the call too, and in 2028, she ran for office in the first cycle of publicly funded election campaigns. And now she occupies the seat that I once held. I couldn't be more proud of her, a true child of the Green New Deal. When I think back to my first term in Congress, riding that old school Amtrak in 2019, all of this was still ahead of us. And the first big step was just closing our eyes and imagining it. We can be whatever we have the courage to see.
Oh, Jim, would you like to explain what we're going to do next?
Well, we'll invite all of you to pop a couple of words about what you're thinking into the chat, and let's have a conversation.
Yeah.
I'm thinking first off the great concept that caring for others is an important activity and economic activity. I wanted to mention while you all are dropping some ideas into the chat, that Molly Crabtree, the illustrator of that remarkable film, her work is just so beautiful. There is a sequel to that film called A Message from the Future to the Years of Repair. And I think that Doug is going to drop a link to that. You can easily find it on YouTube, A Message from the Future to. Pat says that was inspiring and hopeful. And there you go. There's the link to that sequel. I was wondering, Zach, if you'd have a word about how the Biden energy plan compares to the Green New Deal. And while you're thinking about that one, Elaine notes that this is not an optional vision. We really need to have this systemic change.
To have a livable planet.
Indeed.
So the Biden plan, as I mentioned, is by far the most ambitious by a presidential candidate, now a president-elect, ever in our country. And it's he went to great lengths to say this is not the Green New Deal, because of course the Green New Deal has been attacked viciously, as was expected, by Republicans. Everything from the absurd, like the big government is coming to steal your hamburgers, to just more seemingly coherent attacks like this is just a progressive wish list wrapped in a green bow. But Biden's what Biden's policy plan does is a lot of the same things. That is, trying to address inequality and systemic racism by solving the climate crisis, by investing in a livable future. And so let's just put it this way. Biden's policy proposals may not be the Green New Deal, but they make the architects and supporters of the Green New Deal happy. Let's just put it that way.
Thank you.
Okay. And I think we should even wind up there, Jim,
Okay.
because of time constraints. So thank you. And you can keep those comments coming and we can all read them. So to round out the evening, I'd like to introduce Mike Tobin, a 350 Juneau board member who will look to the future for 350 Juneau and how you can become involved. Mike specialized in emergency medicine, and now he's putting his skills to work on the climate emergency. Welcome, Mike.
Hi, everybody, and thank you all for attending. My name is Mike Tobin, and I want to share some opportunities to volunteer with 350 Juneau with you. As you heard, our two upcoming campaigns are the climate emergency events in front of the Capitol on Fridays at noon during the legislative session, and our ongoing campaign to divest the permanent fund and funds managed by the Alaska Retirement Management Board from fossil fuels. In 2021, during the session, we are planning to hold COVID-19 aware outdoor events weekly. We want to create a public space in front of a Capitol to underline the failure of Alaska's political institutions to take the climate crisis seriously. We take it seriously, and we will discuss it seriously outside the building in front in the cold. We will invite other Alaskans to discuss it seriously, and if they can't come to Juneau, we will try to represent their concerns seriously. I say COVID aware because we will be outdoors observing masking and distancing and have COVID safety volunteers to encourage distancing, proper mask use, and to distribute masks and hand sanitizer. We are aware that we may have to cancel events if the state of the pandemic makes that prudent. As during the 2020 session, when many of you participated, thank you, we will have a loudspeaker, banners, flags, dancing, and people speaking on various subjects. And we may have street theater. Since these will be weekly events, there will be lots of opportunities to volunteer. We need COVID safety people. We need people to hold banners and signs, people to shoot photos and video and live stream the events. But we also need people to speak. A few of the topics that have been proposed include the climate crisis and young people, climate change and subsistence, the Wet'suwet'en and other pipeline struggles, the heat pump heroes, the future of clean energy in Juneau, Dorothy 2, AELMP, and Avista, adding electrical capacity. And we should mention Juneau district heating in there. Also missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and Two Spirits, and defending the sacred, the struggle to protect the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge and the Tongass. So if you're a fisherman, a scientist, a young person, a teacher, a subsistence user, or a legislator, come speak and tell your story. In addition to short speeches on these topics that I mentioned and others, we will have time at the end of each session where people can tell their personal stories about the climate crisis. Write a poem or song and contribute it to your community. Volunteers are also needed, as Bob mentioned, for our Divest from Fossil Fuels campaign. As he mentioned, for 3 years, we have been attending quarterly meetings and testifying. And we have been testifying on what are called fiduciary or financial grounds. But it's time to up the ante because they are not listening to us. And we think we need to make our arguments now on moral, ecological, and social grounds also. For this, we need your help. Join us in testifying. We will work with you to tell your story effectively to the APFC and the ARMB. In addition to volunteering on these two campaigns, we need a digital communication organizer to amplify our digital presence on Facebook and to add more platforms as we're able. There's contact information in the chat and on a slide. You can visit our website at 350Juneau.org to see a lot of other volunteer opportunities and to learn more about the science of climate change. And you can visit our Facebook page, 350Juneau, to see posts about the science and strategy of the climate movement, including videos like the wonderful one we just saw from AOC and its sequel. Thank you, everybody.
And thank you, Mike. I apologize, we've gone a few minutes over, but not much. This has been a really great evening. Please contact us at 350Juneau at gmail.com. 350Juneau, very simple, at Gmail. And let us know if you would like to become involved in our work, and we will contact you back. We'll call you or email you. And don't forget to sign up for our Facebook page. And really check out our website. We've recently launched it, and it's pretty beautiful. It has a donation button that's itching for a click, and we can certainly use your support both monetarily as well as energetically to keep up the pressure on our city, our state, and national leaders. So now, before we sign off, Jane is going to unmute everybody, and we can say goodbye. And thank you so much. It's been a fabulous evening, and I'm thrilled with the number of people who have showed up. So unmute us. Are we unmuted, Jane?
You have to unmute yourselves.
Oh, unmute yourself. Excuse me. So please unmute, and we can all.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Happy
trails.
Hey.
Thank you, everybody. Oh, wonderful.
Thank you.
Bye.
Linda, Jennifer.
Thank
Yeah, thanks for coming, Joe, Natalie, Corin,
Thanks, Zach.
Richard, Mary Tonsmeyer, Corin,
Don, Margot.
Margot Waring,
Yeah, Laura. Oh, wow. Linda,
everybody I know. Hey there, John, Mary
Gretchen,
Mhm.
Aunt Dina. Wow,
Gretchen,
Keith, Laura.
Mitchell.
Yeah, good show, guys. Christina, thank you.
Oh my God.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye, guys.
Much.
Thank you,
Happy
everybody.
trails.
Thank you, Zach, and everybody.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Zach.
Zach.
Good
Thank you, Natalie.
5
Bye.
seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1.
Oh,
Boom.
great.